All right, we are just about ready to begin. Having a little difficulty here with the electronics, but I think we're going. We shall see. All right, we are continuing on with what we did a few weeks ago. We're still studying secondary progressions. We began by looking at all the secondary progressions in the speaker's chart, because it's a chart he's familiar with, and it's a textbook chart. Now what we're doing is we're trying to see if there is a relationship with modern presidents under whom the speaker has lived, and whether there are relations to the transits and the progressions. And when we looked at the transits, we weren't very successful. We didn't find many things that were related to what was in the air at the time. So we assumed that the people were not the men of the times. Now we're doing the same thing with secondary progressions. We're taking each president and the time when they are inaugurated to see what kind of progressions, if any, are active and what that meant to their life. The hope was when we began this that the inauguration would be a culmination of a lifetime ambition. And it turned out not to be the case very often. It was for Obama, but for some of the others it wasn't so clear. But we did find other things, and that's what we're doing now, is seeing what is right. Let me see here if I can adjust this for maximum clarity. All right. This is a chart of George H.W. Bush, father of George Bush, the later president. He is the first president, first world leader to have been the chief of the secret police before becoming president. Since then, Vladimir Putin has shared that distinction, but at one time, George H.W. Bush was the head of the CIA. That is a topic, the CIA is a topic that might come up more this evening. Let's look at the natal chart. Now, looking at the sun is in a grand trine with Mars on one corner and Saturn and the moon on the other corner. This is somebody that has deserved a prominent position in life. The sun is in the 10th house, and it has probably worked for lifetimes to achieve this. However, the strongest aspect is not the grand trine, the strongest aspect is the Sun is square to Uranus. And that is indicates something like dubiousness concerning his life of secrecy. Now this brings in a Uranus is also square to Jupiter, very faint, and the Sun is opposite. And this indicates that technicalities are involved in all of this. Another thing to note about the chart is that Venus conjoins Pluto, and someone who loves and loves dearly and forever, though the love might be a little cold from time to time. Now the situation with George H.W. Bush is that he wasn't a popular man. He was a capable man, and he had talents. He was very intelligent, but he wasn't popular. But he came in on the coattails of Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan, who was president before him, had a very popular presidency, and even though George H.W. Bush wasn't what the United States wanted, they liked it better than the alternative, which I believe was George McGovern, and the public didn't want that. All right, now let's start looking at some of the progressions at the time. Now, the Sun, if you look here, the Sun is in the 12th house, and it's about to pop over the ascendant. And this indicates someone who, for quite a while the Sun is transiting or progressing through the 12th house, lived a life, a hidden life, a life in obscurity. And he's about to pop into the open and be before the public, like it or not. Now, interesting thing here is that Mars is also active. Mars is opposite the ascendant. And this describes the presidency of George H.W. Bush. He was involved in the first Iraq War. And he defended, well, what was the little country that was oil rich there? Oh, I forget. They were taken over by Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis, and United States came charging in and drove them out. So you can see that this is some kind of a culmination of his tendency toward bellicosity. Now, Mars in the natal chart is trine the Sun, so there isn't a war that he didn't like, but the fact that it's together with his presidency indicated that his bellicosity was ripe. Let's look and see if some other things. Venus is square to Pluto. It's in the 11th house, and I find often that the 11th house is the house that has to do with international relations. And he was, he had a lot of interactions with foreign countries. He's famous for passing out from not liking Chinese food when he was in China. And it was basically something of a fiasco. The moon in the 7th house by progression is trine to Venus and is trine to the natal Pluto. And he had one asset, and that was his wife, Barbara. And for as much of a stick man as he was, she was a robust, likable type of person. Maybe a little heavy-handed from times to time, but that was his strength. And basically, having her in the White House ironed things out for him. All right, we're going to move on. Next we go to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was basically an entertainer, and that was his life. He has the sun here in the second house, and the aspects that the sun make are a square to the moon and a square to Jupiter, and Jupiter is opposite the moon, and that is probably the strongest aspect in the natal chart. Now, if you're an entertainer, there are very few low-key entertainers that make it. And the fact that he has this emotionally exaggerative quality about him is what made him successful as an entertainer. And his expressive ability, whether he had good ideas or not, was focused through this kind of enthusiasm that he put forth. And this is what won him the presidency. There are other aspects in the chart. There's some nice aspects. Saturn is sextile to Venus, and it is trine to Mars, who is also sextile to Venus. So that in the basic fundamental emotions, he's all right. He's steady, stable, sticks with the basic way of things. Mercury conjoins Uranus, and that shows his mind is inclined toward rather unusual things, and things pop into his mind that aren't necessarily so. Now, the thing that's interesting about his presidency is that in the natal chart, Pluto is opposite the ascendant. And since Pluto hardly moves in the progress chart, Pluto is also opposite the ascendant. So Pluto is a planet of influence, and is a planet of power, usually hidden or secretive power. And so his winning the presidency was a matter of influence. Basically, he could charm people and he could enthuse people, whether he had good ideas as a president or not. Usually not, but that's neither here nor there. The sun in the progress chart at the time of the progression is sextile to Pluto. And that sextile shows that he played along well with the influence. There is not a lot else. He was a good speechifier. Mercury is activating that it's square to the sun, and we're saying that the squares are not necessarily a detriment. The gift of gab and being able to talk a lot are fine. You know, often the public doesn't expect a lot of knowledge or doesn't expect a lot of insight from the president. They got it from people like Kennedy, but they didn't expect it from Ronald Reagan. So the moon is in the 12th house, sort of a hidden away figure. And he was basically a stand-in president, or a president in figure and not really in activity. Now, Mars is trine to Pluto in the second house. And he, at the time, he gave the largest tax cut to the plutocrats ever given in the United States. And that was his figure, was to benefit the plutocrats, to give tax cuts. abstractly, well, the eighth house rules taxes, and the sun is sextile to Pluto, showing that kind of thing is likely. So this is one of the big things of his life. Now, some of his gaffes did come out, like, for example, he thought that trees polluted the environment. He did a few other things like that, but basically he was forgivable, and he was a lovable little old man that sat in the White House and watched movies while the people that the party and the powers selected to be the cabinet did the activity. What happened is he actually won a second term. Let's look at the second term and see what's different there. All right, now let's close this one out first. He actually won a second term, because what happened is when he came into office, there was a recession. And with his tax cuts and cutting down on any kind of domestic spending, the economy rebounded. And people vote according to their pocketbooks. And so he won a second term. In the second term, let's see what is active. The sun is not so active. Or sun is conjoined to Saturn in the second term. This is, like almost a destined foregone conclusion. Now, Saturn forms this trine with Mars in the natal, and that's often the sign of mechanical function, something where you bring something down to a way that it functions like a machine, and it does very well. And he had a administration. There was some corruption in it. There has hardly ever been. I think Obama's the only administration that had zero corruption in it. And the sun conjoined Saturn indicates that he had a well-oiled machine, and he was able to carry out what he wanted to carry out. The moon in this chart is in the first house, and it's coming up to Uranus. And that is an indication of more gaffes in the second administration than in the first. But people were accepting and forgiving. We can see that you might say that the natal sun is in the second house. And it has progressed. By the time he is president, it has progressed to the fifth house. This indicates that the achievement of his life in his latter years is like his ability to play president is his great achievement in his life in his latter years. All right. I don't want to spend too many times on this. Jimmy Carter. This is a fascinating and accurate chart. I don't know how to say it. Jimmy Carter was a wonderful man, but he wasn't considered a good president. He could have been, but he bucked the forces that backed Reagan. Now, the sun is in Libra, and that's a charming, kind, peace-loving kind of person. But the sun actually forms almost no aspects. It has a very mild square to Pluto. So he has trouble with powers in high places where Nixon found favor with them. So the situation with Ronald Reagan is he does not have a personality that people like. It's not a strong, standout personality. His deeds stand out, and they stand out very well. Another thing is, not only did he not play with the people in power, he has Saturn in the first house and Saturn in Scorpio in the first house, which is a rather unpopular positioning. Saturn forms no aspects, but in the first house, it is still something that people can come to dislike. And he was an unpopular president. Now, some of the other things that are in here are really funny. Venus conjoins Neptune, which shows a very gentle fantasy aspect. But Venus is also opposite to Mars. Neptune is too, but not so much. And Venus and Mars, this cost him a lot of votes because he was an honest man. And because he said during the campaign, when he was running against Reagan, he says, yes, I do sometimes have trouble with bad thoughts about women. And this is the signature of that. He was an honest man, but sometimes honesty doesn't serve you well. Also, in his honesty, he had unusual things happen to him. He was somewhere, I believe, in the Okefenok or some swamp like that. He was out in a boat or in a raft, and a rabbit came and tried jumping in the boat. And a big deal was made out of it. It was a rather strange kind of event. And that's the kind of thing that happens to you when you have Mercury opposite Uranus. Unusual events happen and they get publicized. Now, probably the strongest aspect in the chart is with Jupiter, and Jupiter being trine to Pluto. Pluto in the ninth house is his irrefragable religious faith. It can't be broken. And it is his very high morality. His morality is conservative with that Pluto flavor to it, but it is a very, very high morality that he has. And it cost him some. Like, this was in the time that both Reagan and Jimmy Carter had to take strong stances against communism. And he did things that made him unpopular, but he did it based on his ideals. He boycotted the Olympics in Russia, which was hugely unpopular with the people of the United States, even though it was a statement about communist Russia's behavior. I forget what the event was that provoked the boycott, but that's that's what occurred. Now, in the progress chart, we see Mars is exactly square to Jupiter. And Mars square Jupiter is an aspect that represents pride. He took pride in his values, and he didn't back down. And he acted on his values, which cost him a lot. In this, Mercury was just past the conjunction to Jupiter, and it was square to Mars, and it was square to Uranus. Now, there was what was called stagflation, because there was stagnation in the economy, but it was like not a rampant inflation, but an inflation that just hung on and hung on and hung on. And he didn't handle it well, because the things that he did were idealistic. Like, he started an energy program, and he started an education program. He started all these programs that were extremely futuristic. Uranus is the futuristic planet, and it's active. And if the United States had stayed on course with his programs, it would have gone well. You know, we would not be having the energy crises that we've been having in recent years. But that it didn't work that way. And he went in the face of big power. And he went in the face of the oil companies. And he did not have the power to do the things he wanted to do. And the people who had the real power, which are the financiers, blocked or did not allow everything to be done that he wanted to be done. So it's a very interesting presidency. Let's see, are there any more? Yeah, the moon is passing over his sun, saying that he was ripe to be president. Even though the sun is square to Pluto, during the presidency, the moon progressed into those squares, and they kept getting stronger. So you can see how the further his presidency went on, the more trouble he was in. In fact, when it came time to run for a second term, he had an extremely low approval. And it's really funny the way politics works. Here is a very fine human being who has low approval from the people, but that's the way things go. All right. Gerald Ford. All right. Gerald Ford won the presidency by default. It was a strange thing. Nixon was in trouble because of the Watergate scandal, in that the people who were backing him for election invaded the Democrat headquarters at the Watergate Hotel, and there was a scandal about it, and he tried to cover up, and when he tried to cover up, he committed a crime. And he lied to Congress and a few things like that, and that's Richard Nixon. But it was clear that Nixon was going to have to resign his presidency. But the vice president was Spiro Agnew. And Spiro Agnew was basically a stooge. Nixon was so popular for the second term that he could run with a stooge and do very well. But they didn't want Agnew as president. So these are all behind the scenes workings, but what happened is Agnew was found out to be guilty of income tax evasion, which is a federal crime, and he was forced to resign office. And the day after he resigned office, Nixon appointed Ford as vice president, and then Nixon resigned and Ford became president. And this is the chart, the progressions when Ford became president by default. What to say about this chart? Now, first about Gerald Ford's political career. He's the only president of the United States that has never held federal office. He was only a representative from Michigan. He never was a senator or never held any federal office or position and until this appointment. The man was a rather nondescript man. You shouldn't say that about any human being, but he didn't have any qualities that really stood out. He was a mystery, basically, and unknown to the public. The sun is conjoined to Neptune, so that is true. But he's not dumb, but he is another one of the president that made gaffes similar to the gaffes that Reagan made, but only Ford had his own types, and Mercury square Mars indicates that kind of thing. Mars is trine Jupiter. He had self-respect and didn't diminish himself or didn't diminish the office. The Moon and Venus are opposite each other. Sometimes indicates difficulty with understanding or working with women, but Uranus sextiles the Moon and it trines Venus, and that forgives all of that, or that clears all of those things up. So basically, with Taurus rising and the Sun in Cancer and the Moon forming all those aspects with Venus and Uranus, this is a man who is more of his emotions than he is of his mind. And that sums up his character. I don't recall any great things that he did as president. One thing he did shortly after becoming president is he pardoned Richard Nixon. And he did it when Evel Knievel was trying to jump across the Snake River Canyon, and the whole world was watching that. And when the whole world was watching that, he did a tumbler rigger and pardoned Nixon. There are no special things that I can see. The Sun is moving toward a sextile of its natal position. It means he's about 57 years of age. Venus is forming no particular aspects. It's coming toward Mercury. He could be persuasive, but he isn't. That was available to him in the future, but as his brief presidency carried on, it didn't work that way. Mars forms, I think, no aspects. So Mars forms no aspects, and so we can't say that this presidency is something that is a culmination of work of any kind, like not of a personal ambition nor of some kind of a personal achievement with regard to being in politics or anything else. So it's, not much can be said. We're going to be very short tonight because I am still suffering somewhat, and oh no. What is this? Richard Milhouse Nixon. The progressions are for his first inauguration. It's a very interesting chart. In the first place, you have all of the heaviest planets up elevated. This is a man of ambition. All of his life, he tried several times for the presidency. He ran against Kennedy, and after having lost twice to Kennedy, he laid low. And after Lyndon Johnson, he ran successfully for the presidency. So we have a man who is a man of ambition. but it's not clear what his consciousness is like. We have the sun down here in Capricorn, and it's only moderate, but it's opposite to Neptune. This is somebody who does not understand himself. And it's somebody that lies to himself or deceives himself. I don't know how to say it. After he was out of office, he would tell little children in shopping malls, it's all right if the president does it. And, and things like that. And when he was being impeached, he was walking through the White House talking to the pictures of other presidents. This indicates someone that has, mind you, he was under a lot of stress. This is when he had the phlebitis. And phlebitis is when your blood starts clotting and you have to take thinners. And it's something that happens when a lot of hate is projected at you. In a way, I felt sorry for Nixon at the time because so many people were projecting hate at him. And I thoroughly believe that the clotting of his blood was due to the fact that people were projecting hatred toward him. Then we look at the planets down here. We have a rotating conjunction of Mars in Sagittarius conjoins Mercury in Capricorn, and they both conjoin Jupiter in Capricorn, and they're all opposite to Pluto. And this is reckless abandon for power. Pluto is the planet of power, and a good Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, reckless abandon is good for a good description of that part of things. His presidency, he was a good president. Mind you, things were very different then. Richard Nixon was to the left of George Clinton, to show you how liberal he was. He was in like the sixth house. He was in favor of wage controls. He didn't want to see a spiraling inflation due to constant strikes and raising of prices due to having to meet labor demands and things like that. That's the way he looked at it anyway. And so he was quite good about that. In international relations, he had a fiasco in China when he was still vice president yet. But basically, he saw, when he became president, he saw the need to open to China. He was a futuristic man. He maybe didn't do it in the best of ways, but so he was basically a reasonably good president. He made errors, there's no doubt about that. Mercury was square to Neptune, and that led to some of the confusion in cultural differences with Chinese and being able to communicate properly with them. But the natal is his mainstay. The Saturn sextile Neptune, he was, how would you say it, conservative enough, not in a political sense, but conservative in not acting out and being diplomatic and having all of those qualities, and that they were his saving grace in matters like that. What more is ripe here? There's nothing with the moon. There's nothing really with Mars. Is there? We looked at Mercury being square Neptune with Venus. Venus is square to Uranus, a little bit erratic. That's about all we can see with this. I'm getting very tired, so this is going to end soon. Let's look at the, this is the second inauguration. I suspect that the inauguration took place a little earlier than this, when the son was right on the descendant, and that would show the disfavor that he would have in the way he addressed the people, or the way the people felt about him. That basically he was going against the tide in everything. Secrets, Moon is square to Neptune, and it was more devastating than when Mercury was square to Neptune in his first administration. This turned out to be the secrecy and the trying to cover things up that cost him the presidency. It's one of those things like covering a lie, you tell a bigger lie, and the bigger lie happens to be a perjury, and it turns out to be a greater crime. Anything with Mars here? No, nothing with Mars. I think that's all we can say. We could say that the sun began in the 5th house, and it ended at the cusp of the 7th house, when he fell in disfavor with the public. I think this is as far as I wish to go tonight. I have been suffering a condition that has made me weak, and so that will be it for tonight.